So, hi everyone. My name's Claire from Make Seconds Count, if you don't already know. And we are recording some content as part of Dying Matters Week, which is the 5th to the 11th of May this year. And our guest today is Kristie Scott, otherwise known as the Death Planner. Hello.
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You?
Good, I'm good, thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part in this. I think it's always a subject that's important to talk about, particularly
Yeah,
for the secondary breast cancer community. I think it's really important that we have these conversations. So, I thought I'd just start with, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
yeah, of course. I've spoken to a few people in your community before. I've done the tea and chat,
Yes,
haven't I? But if
you
I
have.
haven't met
Yes.
you, if I haven't met you, my name's Kristie Scott. I'm a professional estate planner, former funeral director. Um, Decided to take all of my qualifications for estate planning during COVID. Set up my business during COVID, and yeah, it's been running now for 4 years. I absolutely love it.
Good, good, good. So what inspired you to transition from being a funeral director to an estate planner and establishing the death planner?
Um, so during COVID, obviously being a funeral director was quite hard going. It was very hard
Mm,
going. And obviously there was so much uncertainty and families that I was obviously looking after um, were losing people of all different ages very unexpectedly. And it just became really apparent that these families, especially if the person was of a younger age, hadn't had any sort of discussion ahead of time about, what happens if you die, and what these people wanted. So I just felt at that time that there must be something that I can do that can just make things easier for these loved ones once, you've lost
mm,
somebody. Because it definitely added like an different element of grief to what they were
yeah.
going through. So it was just an extra sort of stress and worry for them to think about. So yeah, I started the death planner during COVID, and it was to start with, it was very much just wanted to get people talking about death, using the word death, just trying to get away from the taboo of the subject, trying to normalize it so people aren't so scared to talk about it. And from there, I was thinking, this is brilliant. How can I make some money from it so that I can turn it into a business and link everything together? So
Mhm.
yeah, I decided to take my estate planning qualifications because obviously writing your will, letters, wishes, all of that kind of stuff just adds to um, helping your loved ones after you've died. So yeah, that's where it came from. Um, Obviously the name is a bit of a stickler for some people, but the reason behind it, like I said, was to get the word death out there and try and take the scaredness away from
I, th
talking about it.
I think it is one of those words, isn't it, that despite the fact that it's going to happen to all of us at some
Everyone.
point,
Yeah.
granted some of us earlier than others
Yeah.
given diagnosis and things like that, but it seems to be such a divisive topic a lot of the time, doesn't it? So I
Yeah.
think it's, as you said, I think it's good to say it and say what it is. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, that is what you're doing, is trying to help someone plan for the death and make things as comfortable as possible for the
Yeah.
families.
And it definitely makes a huge difference. I've seen it, it makes a difference to the person who's dying,
Yeah.
gives them peace of mind, and then, the difference to their loved ones. They're not second guessing decisions once that person's died, and they know that they've followed their wishes.
Yeah.
It gives a lot of peace. So
Fabulous. So can you tell us a bit about your services as a death planner and what types of things do you cover?
yeah, so I have general conversations with people through Instagram. If people have got any death questions, I get a lot of stuff about funerals, cremations, what actually happens, all that kind of stuff that I'm more than happy just to have a chat about. Um, then the actual paid services I offer. So I write wills, I write letters of wishes, I deal with things like guardianship of children, um, lasting powers of attorney, or another one that's another document that's really important. I do create digital estate plans for people and also something called death cleaning.
Brilliant. So I think actually some of the questions that we've got for today, we're going to go into a bit of more in
Yeah,
depth
yeah.
about some of those. But why is it important for someone to make a will? And what are the consequences of not having one?
Okay, so if you don't make a will, then what happens is when you die, if you have assets, then the state will decide what happens with them. So there's something called the laws of intestacy, which is like a big diagram, and it will follow a pattern. So if you have, say you have children, goes to children, and then it follows to brothers and sisters, parents, all of that kind of stuff. So it will just follow through. Who survives will get your estate. And obviously, for some people, that's absolutely fine. But for others, it's often means that people would inherit that they wouldn't want, to receive any benefit from their estate. So a lot of the time the will is done so that the exact people that people want to inherit actually receive those items.
Yeah.
Um, the other reason to write a will is because within a will, it's not just about your assets. You can include lots of information, on your funeral, on your pets, all different kinds of things, organ donation. Obviously, people don't have these discussions, and the will is the only document that they put these kind of things in. So if
Mm.
you haven't had those discussions, then if it's in the will, then at least people know what your thoughts were.
And as you say, I think it's important because it is that very thing, isn't it? It's what you want to happen after you're not here,
Yeah.
which I think is really important for people. So, do you need to use a professional will writer, or can you create a will using a DIY kit, or even just write it yourself on a piece of paper? Can you talk a little bit about that part of
Yeah,
it?
so you can just write it on a piece of paper and sign it, get it witnessed. Obviously, not mentioning any names, but there's certain shops that sell DIY kits. I just think with something so important as a will, you're talking about something that could potentially be looking after up to £1 million or more
Mm,
of property, belongings, all of that kind of stuff. I know that they might seem quite expensive to set up, but actually, when you think of it in percentage terms as to what your estate is worth, it's actually just really important to get it done properly. I think if you do a DIY will, that's okay, but the first thing is you have to make sure that it's witnessed correctly, because if it's not witnessed correctly, then it's completely void. No
right.
matter what else is in the will, if it's not witnessed correctly, it's done and
Mhm.
dusted. It's not worth
Okay.
what it's written on. The second thing is there will be lots of things that you don't think about. So obviously it's like when you get somebody in to do your boiler. You could do it yourself, but you don't because you don't know everything about that
Yeah.
boiler. Bits of it, and you probably could fix it, but why chance it? You
Yeah.
know, a
True.
professional will writer like myself or a solicitor, they will ask you questions for
Mm.
reasons that you won't even consider.
Yeah.
So you can do it yourself, just be very, very careful.
Okay. So better to protect yourself, as you say, by reaching out to those that know. As you say, there might be a lot of things that you just don't understand or
Yeah.
don't know why you would need that
Yeah,
included, but you guys do.
or wouldn't even think of some of the
Yeah,
things that I would ask you. So yeah, you're more than welcome to try and do it yourself. But obviously, if it's not worth the paper it's written on when it comes to the time, then it's difficult for the people that left behind.
yeah. So I've heard people talk about a letter of wishes.
Mhm.
So what is a letter of wishes and how does it differ from the will?
Okay, so not everybody has to write a letter of wishes. So the will is a legal document, so that will pass to your executors and they will have to follow that will by the letter. A letter of wishes is kind of like a supporting document. So it sits with the will. So if you write a letter of wishes, you should always keep a copy of it with your will, but it isn't a legal document. So whatever you put in the letter of wishes, you've got to trust that the executor will follow because they don't have to.
Okay.
Um, the only good thing about a letter of wishes is where it's not a legal document, you can make it sort of a fluid document, so you can update it at any time because you don't have to get it re-signed and witnessed. So it can be kind of like an evolving document that you can add to. The other good thing about it is that once, with the will being legal, once it's your will's been read, it does become a public document. So
Right.
anybody
Okay.
can read your will and last will and testament. Obviously, some people don't want certain things known, so they may put explanations of things in the letter of wishes. So even though the will's made public, the letter of wishes isn't. Um,
Okay.
For example, if you have, I don't know, a mother-in-law you don't get on with, and you've left her out of the will, or you wanted to make note of something, then, she could possibly read that will one day. So
Mhm.
put the detail in the letter of wishes. It's also a letter of wish is also good. Say you've got secondary cancer and you've got young children. It can kind of, well, it can be quite an emotive document. So you could write, your hopes and dreams for your children as they grow up,
Mhm.
any family traditions that you did every Christmas or Easter. You could put those in that letter, in the hope that they would continue,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a really good document to have. And like I say, you can add to it, and it can be as long or as short as you want it to be.
Okay. Um, so are you required to inform family or beneficiaries about the contents of your will?
No, not at
No,
all. No.
don't have to.
I would probably, the only people I would probably say to, to let them know that you've written a will would be the executors. Obviously, it's always wise to ask them first if they're
Yeah.
happy to act, because the last thing you want is, to die and then they don't want to do the job.
Yeah.
So I'd always tell the executors, and I would probably tell them where you've stored the will. But as for the contents, you don't have to tell people in advance. You may choose to give copies to your children or whoever, but it's not a requirement. You can write a will and squirrel it away, and it can be a surprise.
Okay, and so what happens if a family disagrees with the contents of a will? I take it there's absolutely nothing they can do about it if you disagree.
You can. So once somebody's died, and the will is read, say for example, you've got the person who died had three children, and they left their estate divided equally between just two of them
Mhm.
and didn't include the third, then it's highly likely, if there's no exclusion or no reason in that will, as to why that third child has been left out, then that third child would probably have a really good case to go to court and what they call contest the will. So say, I don't understand why mum's left me out. I think everything should be divided between the three of us. And if there's, like I say, if there's no explanation as to why that third child was left out, then they'd probably be quite successful at that claim.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, I find that in this environment at the moment where everyone's struggling, for money and things are really difficult, there's definitely been an increase in
Yeah.
wills being contested because people are just trying their luck and
Mm.
thinking that, it's worth a try maybe to get however many thousands of pounds, but it does cost. Some people are very foolish and spend a huge amount of money trying to contest a will, and then, basically what they get out of it is gone. So there's a
Yeah.
fine line. Yeah, but
Okay.
people can contest it if they don't agree with it.
Okay. Um, so could you tell us if it's best to put a house in a trust, and what does that actually mean?
Um, so putting a house in a trust, it's completely dependent really on each individual's situation. So it would depend on how they own the property, if they own it on their own, if they own it with a partner or if they're married, if they've got children under the age of 18, all these kinds of things. If you put a house into a will trust, then what that can do, and like I said, obviously it would be discussed with each individual, but what that can do is it can often save or protect against care fees. So if you own a house together with somebody, there's a way in which we can set up a trust so that if, God forbid, one person has to go into care for whatever reason, then the state can only assess that person's half of the property, and obviously it protects the other half.
Okay.
Um, I know for a lot of people with cancer, specifically secondary cancer, if they are of a younger age with a young family, their concerns are often that they're going to die within the next couple of years.
Mhm.
And there's a possibility that their current spouse or partner may remarry or meet somebody else, and then obviously
Mhm.
everything gets left possibly to the new wife or partner,
Yeah.
um, and then their children end up with nothing. So there's ways that by putting a house into a trust or assets into a trust that we can protect
Right.
their half of the estate for their children.
Okay.
So yeah, they can be really important tools to make sure that that protection's there.
And I think that sounds like from some of the community conversations that I've been
Yeah.
involved in, that's actually one of the probably the bigger fears, isn't it? Is
Mhm.
about the things you can't control after you're not here, I
Yeah.
suppose, and the the things that you can do now while you are here to kind of put your mind at ease and set things up, and actually probably gives you a sense of relief, you
Yeah.
know,
I think that
ahead of time.
I would say the guardianship and the worry of not their children not getting their inheritance is the two main reasons that people that are poorly tend to set up, and is probably the two best reasons to do
Yeah,
it. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
because you can only control so much from the grave, but you
Hmm.
can do this, and it will make a difference. And probably half of the people's partners don't meet somebody else, but if they do,
Yeah.
you have to think the worst of everybody. And I know that's awful, but if it's in place, then there's no confusion, and it, yeah, just puts your
Yeah.
mind at rest.
Yeah. No, 100%. So are people best to plan sort of like every last detail of their wishes, or do you leave some things up to the family, or is it very dependent on each person's circumstance, I guess?
I think there are certain things that you have to do. So, guardianship, if there's an exclusion, that kind of thing. I think if you're having an open discussion with your family about it, sort of ongoing, things about your funeral, that kind of stuff. I think it's very much, there are some people that have detailed everything down to the very last, you know,
Yeah.
at very last detail. So they'll have a colour scheme going. They'll have their music done for the funeral, type of coffin, the
Hmm.
floral tribute. They'll have the flower that they want. Um, I think it's different for everybody. I think if maybe you're on your own, you plan everything so you know it's exactly how you want it. I think if you have young children, there are elements of it that you would say that's your decision, because obviously from experience as a funeral director, the funeral is obviously is about the person who's died, but
Hmm.
the service itself is very much for the people that are still alive.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, because if it was me, I'm quite controlling, so I'd want to know that everything was going to be exactly as I wanted it. But then I also know that my husband and my children would want an input to make it
Yeah.
feel part of, they're part of it. So I think you can maybe go a bit too far. Um, there are
Yeah.
definitely things that you need to detail. But yeah, I think if you have a discussion, if you start this discussion and have an
Yeah.
open and honest conversation, then that will just sort of evolve naturally.
Yeah.
Hope.
Hopefully. Yeah. No. So you talked a little bit about the services that you offered at the beginning, and one of them was death cleaning.
Yeah.
Um, so can you just explain a little bit about what death cleaning is and how it can help with end of life planning?
Yeah. So death cleaning originated in Sweden. You may have heard of Swedish death cleaning as its
Hmm.
proper
Yep.
name. But I've tried to bring it over to the UK. I think it's a fab idea. In Sweden, they generally do it as you progress through life. So you get to 80 years old. What people do is they go through each room of their house and basically have a massive clear out. So they declutter everything
Okay.
they no longer want. And the main reason for this is to ease the burden on loved ones when they've died. So, if anybody has been an executor on here before, they know that the stress, the financial cost, and um, the worry of clearing out somebody's house that's died is a huge job.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, in Sweden, their idea is that they're just helping their loved ones once they've gone. And so everything that remains has a purpose.
Yeah.
Um, the difference between a general declutter and a death clean is that when you death clean, as you go through your house and your home, you go through, so you get rid of everything you no longer feel has a purpose in your life, that you don't get any joy from.
Hmm.
Everything that's left you either use, or if it's something that you want to give to somebody, then when you death clean, you have the opportunity to write a little note with the item.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it kind of passes on, if it was I don't know, so it was an old vase that had been given to you by your great great nan from 1900. It would enable you to write that down and the reason why you're giving it to the person that you're giving it to help pass that family history on. So I don't know about you, but I've often been left something and think, what the hell have I been left that for? What? Because like my nan left me an egg timer. Now I've never cooked. I never cook in the kitchen, so I've got this.
Yeah,
It's beautiful. It's obviously very old, but I have no idea why she gave it to me.
yeah,
If you'd have received a little note with that saying, I know you don't
yeah.
thought it was ironic that you should have it, or
And it makes so much sense actually, because not only is there the sentiment in doing that and
mhm,
realizing the reason why it's been left to you, because as you say, I mean, I've myself have been given things from like, people who've passed, and although you're like, that what did I get that for?
yeah.
And you're keeping it as because it's obviously special,
And there
but
was
you do,
some thinking behind it, obviously.
yeah,
Don't know what it was.
yeah. And so the thought of having the ability to leave that note for that person so they
Mhm.
know it actually sounds really wonderful
Yeah.
as a way to, like communicate that, which I think is really important.
I think it
Okay,
also gives the person that's obviously doing the death cleaning, again, that sense of peace, knowing that they've got rid of the stuff that doesn't mean anything. So there'll be no confusion when they've gone, because it's terrible to go into somebody's house and you look at something and you don't know whether it meant something to that person or whether it's
yeah,
just tat that you can just chuck out.
yeah,
For the family, it's like they're torn between, I've got all this stuff and obviously
yeah,
90% of it's got to go in the bin or to charity, but I don't know what to
yeah.
put in the
And
bin.
I think, like, for the secondary breast cancer community, and certainly for me, just speaking about myself, it's like wanting to have some form of control, which we don't often have with the secondary diagnosis.
Yeah.
You actually can control a lot of that, and that in itself might help you along the way, as knowing that it's going to the right person you wanted it to go to and the
Yeah.
reason why. So it actually sounds like a really lovely element of,
Yeah.
lovely is maybe not the right word, but a really crucial element, important element in that planning
I think
stage.
it can be quite cathartic for
Yeah,
people.
that's
I
a good
mean,
word for it. Yeah.
I'm not poorly, thank God, but I love a declutter and,
Yeah.
every couple of years, the feeling when you've chucked out all the crap that you accumulate.
Yes. But before you then accumulate a whole load of
A
new
whole new load.
crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that sounds really useful. So you also talked about digital planning,
Mhm.
estate planning. So can you explain a little bit about that? And again, why is that an important part for preparing for the future?
Yeah. Um, I don't know why it's suddenly sort of come to light and it's this big thing now, digital estate planning. I don't quite know why it's only just become a thing because obviously we've had like the internet since 1990, is it?
Think
Which to
so,
me
yeah.
isn't that long ago, but actually it is a long, long time
Yeah,
ago.
it's a long time ago.
Yeah. I think the average number of passwords they say that each individual has is about 80, and that's
Hmm.
the average. So, I mean, I know personally I've got a lot more than that. When you think about online shopping accounts, Tesco, Sainsbury, Amazon, subscriptions that you own, YouTube, then you've got social media, so Facebook, Instagram, etc. Also, then you've got things like Google Cloud, where you store your photographs, any intellectual property you might have. So for me, I've got the death planner is trademarked. So all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff. Digital planning is done to pass that information on because obviously a lot of it is either in your head, i.e. passwords, or a lot of it you can't access unless you have the right things to get into the right account. So people don't think about it, but if they actually think of their digital footprint, I think they'd be quite surprised and maybe quite frightened about how much of their estate that their loved ones then may struggle to sort out once they've
Yes.
gone. So obviously you can start with things like bank accounts, um, like I said, subscriptions. You can go through a whole template and just log as much as you can. And again, it is just to make that process easier. Um, the main thing that I would say to pass on is if you store any photographs in the cloud, because companies, unless you have that password to access those photographs, companies will not allow you access. And obviously, when somebody's died, photographs are normally the most important thing, aren't they?
Yeah,
I've known people that have lost thousands that they can't access, and it's heartbreaking. So it
yeah,
is a massive, important element. Um, and for me, things like social media, I've got people that have details so they can go in and close down my accounts because, there's nothing worse than popping up on Facebook once you've died. Do you know this person? And
yeah,
again, it's a control element for me. I don't want my face to be floating about once I've died. I want everything shut down.
yeah,
Um, so it's really important to think about it and how you're going to pass that information on.
yeah. As you say, it's rather mind-boggling to think that nobody's actually been thinking about that, or maybe they have and it just hasn't come
Like I
into.
say, I think they have, but it just suddenly seems to be a
It's
massive, like,
become
oh my
such a
God.
big
And it's
deal.
like, well, why
Yeah,
are people just thinking about it? It's huge.
yeah. And if you're like me, you've got a notepad full of passwords and you just think, well, I'm going to forget all of them, or
Yeah.
tell them where
You
your
update
your
them
notepad
and
is hidden, so that kind of thing. So it seems like a really important step because it's, as you say, there could be photos in the cloud. There's stuff in your Facebook page if you want to memorialize your Facebook page or
or
not, or
continue.
all those things.
If
Yeah,
you've got a big Instagram account, some people
yeah,
like them to continue
yeah.
after death if you've got a big following or whatever. So
Wow, massive, massive thing to think about. Um, so if a husband or wife is uncomfortable discussing their partner's death,
yeah,
can all the planning be completed without their involvement? Or
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, generally, if you're married, you would write wills together so
hmm,
that you know you've got the same wishes, especially obviously if you've got children, it's best to
yeah,
be on the same page as to what would happen to them.
yeah,
If you've got a partner that's adamant that they can't discuss it, um I've worked with lots of women that their partners either can't face it or they're in denial or they just don't think it's important. I've got a lot of women that have come to me and we've done it all. Um, and it's a bit of a shame because I think if you've got that other person, preferably your partner that you're working with,
hmm,
you can bat ideas off each other and, they are big conversations and some of the things are massive decisions that are going to affect this person when you've gone.
yeah. So hopefully they
So
wouldn't be
if you can do
excluding
it
themselves.
together, it's
Yeah,
really, yeah, it's so much better. But yeah, if you can't um, do it with that person, then you can do it all on your own.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think as you say, hopefully that would not be the case, but it's good to know that.
Yeah, no,
I think
and I
if
completely understand. There's definitely
yeah,
people that are struggling, and they can't face it. So the other person has to get on and do it because they can't wait.
yeah,
Um, I have had a few cases where the wife or girlfriend or partner has got on and done it,
hmm,
and then the partner or husband has actually seen not how easy it's been, but it's not been as traumatic as they thought.
yeah,
And then they've come back and we've worked on their part shortly
yeah.
after. So it has all come together in the end.
Yeah, it almost seems a little bit like they're almost protecting themselves from what they think is going to be a
Yeah.
traumatic and actually isn't, as you say, as bad as they think it's going to be. And yeah, so I
And I
think
also think it's important if your partner is, has secondary cancer and is going to die at some point, as we all are,
yeah,
that the person that's left behind needs to make sure that they're protected as well.
yeah,
So, for example, if their wife owns the property that they live in, then the husband needs to make sure that they can continue to live in that
live
property
in that
once
property.
the wife's died or whatever the agreement would be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if couples and people can work together, it's better, but it can be done individually.
Okay. So, um, Make Seconds Count, obviously, we support the secondary breast cancer community. So can you tailor your services to meet the needs of the secondary breast cancer community, or does it need to be tweaked in any way? Or like, I'm assuming you've spoken with people who have metastatic.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people with secondary cancers, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But I'm not sure it's the need to tailor. I'd like to think that I offer a service that is flexible.
Yeah.
So I'm not like a solicitor, and I've got nothing against solicitors, but obviously I can come to people's homes, I can do
Mhm.
evenings, weekends, bank holiday appointments. I can change appointments at short notice if people are having treatment and they're tired, if they wake up an hour before the appointment and feel sick or all that kind of stuff. I would very much hope that's, the difference that I offer is the
Yeah.
level of service and just trying to, yeah, adapt to the people that I'm working with. People sometimes can only work through half of their will at a time because they get tired or, it's too much. So I can split that up and all things like that.
So as you say, it's the flexibility that and the
Yeah.
understanding of what a secondary metastatic breast cancer life is like with the
Yeah.
comings and goings of treatment and things. You're a lot
Yeah. And
more flexible and
sometimes,
able to deal with all of those kind of things.
yeah, if you suddenly get rushed into hospital or, yeah, like I say, a solicitor would generally charge for cancellation or,
Mm,
it's just not a problem because
yeah.
I know you're going to come back to me at some
Yeah.
point, just
Yeah.
doing it when you feel
Ready to and
okay. And
able to.
a lot of people like evening appointments because they have young children and obviously don't want to be discussing this when the kids are awake and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, no, 100%. Okay, so what challenges do clients typically face when initiating end of life planning? And how do you support them through that process?
Ooh. um, so the first challenge I'd say is if the partner or friend or whoever they're with is not on the same page. Um,
Hmm.
but like I say, 9 times out of 10 they catch up. It can just take people different amounts
Yeah.
of time. I'd say the biggest challenge is people leaving it too late. And
Mm.
then it's not that it's a nice discussion. You are talking about death. I'm not stupid. I know it's awful, but it's a discussion that then has to take place extremely quickly, under extreme pressure,
Yeah.
and decisions have to be formed, really quickly, and then you've got to make sure everything gets signed correctly. And it's just, I would say that's the biggest challenge. People leave it and leave it, and I think with secondary cancer, people's illness changes so quickly.
It does.
Um, I know on Instagram, with people that follow me and I follow them and we have conversations, and one minute they're okay, and next minute they're really not. And I, the amount of people that have said to me, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, they they never got to do it. And I just think, oh God, and they've got kids, and I just think, oh,
Yeah. I
what
think,
turmoil.
as you say, secondary breast cancer can really take us by surprise, and that we think we're okay and we think we've got this time. And I think the more or the longer you're in the community, you realise actually that a lot of the time isn't the case. So actually, if you do have time and you do have energy and will to do
Yeah,
these things, set these up, just do it sooner rather than later so that you're protected and covered as is your
yeah.
family. And then you can just put it put it to bed almost and forget about it. It's done and
Yeah, and I think what
pressure, yeah.
I'd like to get across is that these are big decisions and documents that you're doing. They're really important and they need thought,
Hmm.
but they can be done in 2 or 3 weeks. So if you just focus on getting it done within 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's done, and then you can park it and enjoy
Yeah,
life, knowing that if anything happens, everything's under control.
yeah,
Um, you know, wills aren't static documents. If you write one and then 3 years later you want to make a change, but at least you've got something there if the shit
yeah.
hits the fan.
No, that makes perfect sense. As you say, it's something that you can do and have done. And again, it's about this control, isn't it? But it almost you've ticked something off the list of things
Yeah,
that actually is going to be so important when the time comes.
yeah,
You can do that sooner rather than later, then you're helping yourself as well as your
yeah.
families.
And with the lasting powers of attorney, if somebody has a secondary diagnosis, I can often get them put through quicker, but
Mm.
they generally take 4 to 5 months. So for a lot of people that have secondary cancer that have finally got round to doing them,
Yeah,
they don't get the benefit of them because they don't get registered in time.
And I think
Um,
that that's probably a surprise to some people that it does take that long.
yeah,
I guess because we're not having these conversations and things that I guess people think it's just going to, oh yeah, that'll not take long. And
yeah,
if you think about it, 4 to 5 months is a long time.
yeah. Like I say, I can, depending on diagnosis, get them through, but nothing quicker than a month. You're not,
Yeah,
that is probably the quickest
yeah,
that you can get one registered. And people don't realise the difference they make, with hospice care and that kind of thing at the end.
yeah,
So, yes, I would say just do it. It always goes to the bottom of the list. And again, I completely understand why, because it is a shit job to do.
yeah.
But, I'm talking to you as a secondary breast cancer person, but I would be saying the same thing to a young family or somebody who wasn't poorly, just get on and do it. And then it's
Yeah,
done. You could
done.
literally get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
happens.
well, that's it. No one knows what's going to happen. We often talk about this in the secondary breast cancer community, and that all we're aware that we've just been told what's going to happen to us, and it's
Yeah,
going to happen sooner than it is to someone else. But
yeah,
actually, anything can happen, and we've seen that sometimes it's not even the cancer
yeah,
that So we just nobody knows. So if you can plan for these things and protect yourselves and your family, and feel that you've done something and put your mind at ease, then that's massive. I would say anyway. Um, so what role does pre-death planning play in sort of alleviating the burden on the families? Especially if they're kind of at end of life.
I just think it's the whole reason I set the company up
Mm.
is just to help the loved ones you leave behind. I mean, ultimately, these documents are for you,
Hmm.
but the will comes into play once you've died. So you've done your bit, and then it's just the fact that the family know what you want. They might not agree with what you want,
But at
but
least they
there's
know it
no
came from you.
confusion. There's no, oh God, did they want to be cremated or buried? It's like, well, that's a massive difference. If you cremate somebody and then realize that, you'll probably never find out what they wanted, but
Yeah,
it's that little earworm in your head going, oh, did they want to be buried? And that's the kind of stuff that plays on and haunts people that are left behind. And you just want them to think, I've done everything he or she wanted. I couldn't have done any more. I followed their wishes. And that must give, well, you and
mm,
your loved ones a massive peace of mind. Um,
yeah,
and also the time, when somebody dies, you're grieving to start off with, which is
mhm.
awful. But then, the will, if you're then the executor, there's so much to do. And I just think if the decisions are made and you're just following instructions,
Yeah,
then it's still a crappy job. But you know exactly what you're doing, and
yeah, yeah. And you know that what is there and what's written on paper is what that person wanted. So almost in some ways feels like it would be easier to then carry out that task as the executor rather than have people question things, which
yeah,
I've seen
and
firsthand
people
what can
do.
happen. Yeah. And like you say, people do. I've seen it firsthand myself,
Mhm.
even in my own experiences with
Yeah,
you're not sure if that is what they wanted or is that just what you were told. And I think that's only
people's
natural.
choices change,
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like I said, a will isn't set in stone once you've written it. With my clients, I always sort of follow up every couple of years and just say, has anything changed? Because,
yeah,
stuff does. As your kids get older, their needs will change.
yeah,
If your hope is that they go and live with your parents, your parents get older, so all that kind of stuff has to change. Um, so yeah, but I would say for the families and the loved ones, it's so important. There's no guesswork.
yeah. No, 100%. Okay, so my last question is going to be about how we can access
Mhm.
yourself and your services. But is there anything that we've not touched on that you would like to highlight, or anything that you would like to talk about, or as part of your services?
There is one little thing
Yeah,
actually,
of course. Yeah.
and I meant to say about it earlier when I said that people with secondary breast cancer often worry about their partners remarrying and the
Hmm.
guardianship element.
Yeah.
There's another element of guardianship that I know a lot of secondary breast cancer patients, when they're mums,
Hmm.
worry about, and that is if they've been divorced. So
Okay. Uh-huh.
obviously, I don't know what the stats are now for divorce, but they're high, aren't they? So,
Yes, I would
like,
imagine so.
yeah. So the likelihood of maybe, a lady with metastatic breast cancer that's had two children with somebody and they're now divorced, that dad is on the birth certificate, so has legal parental responsibility if anything happens to mum. Um, I know obviously every relationship is different, but unfortunately, and I'm not speaking out of turn because this is actually what happens, the mum has the two kids full time and then they go to see dad every other weekend or whatever.
Yeah.
And the mum is concerned that when she dies, she doesn't want them to go and live full time with dad. And in fact, dad doesn't particularly want them anyway, full
Okay.
time.
Uh-huh.
And I know that mums really worry about this, and there are things that we can do to make that easier. If you've
Okay.
got a step parent that's been involved in your children's lives and they get on really well with and they're part of their daily routine, there's something called a step parent agreement that can
Okay.
be up. Um, yeah, lots of different things. I can't always fix it. Sometimes the kids will go to dad.
Okay.
Sometimes dad, and that is the best thing for them. But yeah, I know a lot of people worry about their
Yeah.
parents not having contact with the kids and all that kind of stuff once they've died. So I can hopefully alleviate some concerns about that.
I mean, I think even knowing that is a possibility, as you say, it may not be able to be what they envision, but even just the fact that you can ask
Mm.
about it and talk about it, because I'm sure that probably will be a fear again about what
Mhm.
happens to your children after you're gone.
Yeah,
And there's that huge, and I think that's probably one of the biggest worries that, the secondary
it
breast
would
cancer
be my biggest
community.
worry.
Yeah, yeah,
So
of
I'm
course it would.
divorced.
Yeah.
I'm divorced. I've got one child with my ex-husband and one with my husband at the moment. Not husband at the moment, obviously, my husband.
And exclusive.
I'm not waiting for husband number three. Oh my God. Maybe edit that bit. But my main worry, not so much now because my eldest is almost 18, so it wouldn't be an issue, but
Yeah,
that would have been my main worry would be,
yeah,
oh my God, he would go and live with his dad and then his brother and his stepdad would be at
yeah.
home. And yeah, there's all sorts
It
of,
would be it would be a massive worry for you, that for sure, if it was the thought of breaking up the family or the dynamics that have
yeah.
been built and created. So it's really important, I think, to know that. Well, as I say, I have thoroughly enjoyed this chat.
Yeah, me
I think
too.
it's all really good points of information. I think it comes up a lot in our community about just trying to understand the process. So hopefully this video and that recording will help with that. What I will say is if any of our community do have any other questions, I will gather them in, and if you don't
Yeah,
mind, I'll send them on to you and you'd be
yeah, of
happy to
course.
answer them for us. But so just finally, it was how can people get a hold of yourself to use your services, and do you work nationwide? Do you work all over the UK, or is it tell us
So
how we get in touch?
unfortunately, I don't cover Scotland because your laws are different.
Okay,
Um, but I do work UK wide, so I can, in person, by Zoom, by telephone. I've got a website,
okay,
www.thedeathplanner.co.uk. It's got a contact form on there. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and actually TikTok. So yeah, contact me any way or pick up the phone and use the old-fashioned way.
yeah,
Yeah, just I get straight back to you. So
brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Kristie, as always. I mean, I know that we've already planned to do some chats as well
yeah,
for our tea and chat program, which I'm looking forward to, which I'll share more about closer to the time. But just thank you again for taking the time to chat with me, and for being part of this Dying Martyrs Week. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can either send them to ourselves at Make Seconds Count, and we'll pass them on, or I'm sure Kristie will be happy for you to reach out directly to her on Instagram or Facebook or in any of the other ways that she suggested. But yeah, thank you so much. It was really
thank
nice to
you.
chat.
And
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.